Thank you very much indeed, Denise. Good afternoon. My name's Charlie Jeffery, and it's an honour to be here as the 7th Vice-Chancellor of the University of York. Before anything else, I should thank the other 6 and all those who worked with them to establish and develop this extraordinary university, including Koen Lamberts, my immediate predecessor, and Ron Cook, who I'm delighted is somewhere in the hall this afternoon. And I want to welcome you all here today, colleagues, students, alumni and supporters, and partners in the city, including the Lord Mayor, Councillor Janet Looker. It's a great pleasure to see so many of you here, and also to welcome those watching on live stream. I'm now 1 month into the job, and I have to say that I and my family have been given such a warm reception, both at work and outside. Moving job, home, schools, and everything that goes with it is always a little daunting. So we're deeply grateful for your welcome and all the helpful tips we've been given about living in York. I owe a particular debt of thanks to those who've inducted me so well into the university. Julie Bedford, Julie Sugden, and Becky Christou in my office, Denise Jagger, Chair of Council, Joe Horsburgh, Registrar and Secretary, and in particular, Saul Tendler, who did a great job as Acting Vice-Chancellor and has been an invaluable source of both advice and kindness to me. I've already met many of you here in Central Hall today, and I've been struck by how enthusiastic and proud people are about the university. Students and staff, members of the local community alike. That's a great strength for the university and incredibly humbling for me. If there is an essence to my job, it's to nurture that enthusiasm so it continues to build on the achievements of which we can rightly be proud. Now, I want to do 3 things this afternoon. I want to introduce myself a little more fully to you. I want to set the scene for a conversation I'd like us all to have over the next few months about a strategic vision to guide us over the next decade. And, in a sense, linking the two, I want to convey what it is about the University of York that inspires me. I addressed that last question at one level in my interview for the job back in March, when I said something like this: York manages a better balance than most other universities between carrying out brilliant research while also caring deeply about the experience of its students. It has a really distinctive and proven capacity to bring together academic disciplines across the university to tackle new questions and challenges. And it has powerful principles that energize a strong university community in shared purpose. Confirmation of these qualities has piled up since then. National Student Survey results were outstanding, underlining the Gold Award we received last year in the National Teaching Excellence Framework. More than 4,500 students graduated in July, joining a 130,000 strong community of alumni in over 100 countries around the world. And York students absolutely whooped their Lancaster counterparts in the annual Roses Sports Tournament. And the last few months have seen us win a whole host of major research awards, often combining disciplines from all parts of the university in novel ways. In digital arts, focused on storytelling through new immersive technologies. In biodiversity, where a recent award is led with extraordinary creativity by a biologist, an early modern historian, and a social scientist of health, but also in quantum technologies, in robotics and autonomous systems, and in environmental science. What I've come to understand more since I was appointed is that these and myriad other achievements, past and present, rest on a sense of shared purpose, which is especially strong in this university and can be traced back to the ideas that drove its foundation in the 1960s. And I'll return to those ideas later. First, I want to say a little bit about myself, about what makes me tick. I'll do so by looking back at a number of definitive moments in my life. I'm going to start in 1974, my final year in primary school. Here I am. So with hair, evidently without fashion sense. Now, those were formative times. I was, for example, the only child in my year to start what has become a lifelong affinity with Manchester City Football Club. Which for many years was more of an affliction than the pleasure it has been more recently. And my musical tastes firmed up then around vigorous guitar-led music, which next weekend will take me to see a triple bill of Alice Cooper, the Stranglers, and the utterly legendary MC5. And I was the only child in my year who ended up going to university. We came from a rural backwater in Northamptonshire, what was then a disadvantaged community in terms of income, but also aspiration. Education generally wasn't valued. I was lucky. I had a mother who gave me an interest in learning even before I went to school, and a head teacher who tried to open up opportunity for his kids. So hats off to Mum and Mr. Moggridge. But really, although I didn't think in this way till much later, it was shameful that only one of 30 or so kids in my year went to university. Even with a smaller proportion attending university then than now, 4 or 5 of my classmates should have gone to university, and it would be about 15 now. That they didn't has fired in me a commitment to widening access. I want that to mark my time in York. University for me was Loughborough in 1981, a university famed perhaps most for its sporting prowess. I'm afraid I didn't contribute much to that, unless you can count the famous evening when I scored a maximum 180 in the local darts league. But the European Studies degree I took at Loughborough set me on a path which later led to my appointment as lecturer in European politics at Leicester University in 1989. By coincidence, a colleague in my department at Leicester, Murray Forsyth, had organised a conference on German federalism which took place in the very week that I started. I knew very little about German federalism, but that was no hindrance to being asked to pull together an edited book from the conference with the highly original title of German Federalism Today. And that was a foundational moment in 3 ways. First, it established an interest in decentralised political systems, which has been an ever-present for me since. Second, it was my entry ticket into international networks in the field, including collaborations with a dear late friend, Frank Del Martino, at the University of Leuven in Belgium. Frank had a research assistant called Elke Versmessen, who some of you will know as my wife. Not many people can say that it was federalism that brought them together. Now, the third way in which that conference had enduring effect was the way it brought together civil servants and academics. As I became an expert in German federalism, I did so with those civil servants and somehow became a trusted partner in thinking about constitutional reform in Germany after German unification. That experience of connecting academic analysis to the practice of politics, in today's terms, research impact, has followed me through my career. It shaped my time at the University of Birmingham, where I worked for 10 years from 1994 with a brilliant mentor, Willie Patterson, who I'm so pleased can be here this afternoon. And it was the basis for me becoming director of a national research programme on UK devolution and constitutional change, which I took on in 2000 when I was in Birmingham, and which followed me to the University of Edinburgh in 2004. Now, I was a controversial choice to run that programme. There were, I have to say, rumbles of discontent in the political science profession. Letters were written to the Times Higher Education Supplement. How could a specialist in Germany possibly lead work on constitutional change in the UK? What, indeed, could we ever learn from people who knew about other places? We needed British ideas to understand British politics. Well, yes, I am parodying the situation just a little bit. But I'm also making a serious point. Because some of us had worked with Germans, Belgians and others, we had fresh perspectives on questions like Scottish devolution. That opened up new ways of thinking, which in the end came to be recognised by some of those in the political science profession who had once grumbled about my appointment. Now, there's a point there that we can write large for universities as a whole. Universities flourish when people and the ideas they carry flow freely from place to place. I want that principle too to mark my time at York. Whatever the political challenges, and of course Brexit looms large here, whatever the political challenges which might impede that flow. So I moved with the devolution programme to the University of Edinburgh in 2004, where I later had a term as head of School of Social and Political Science and became a Pro-Vice-Chancellor in 2011. I must have done a decent job because I was asked to become Deputy Vice-Chancellor in 2014. And that brings me to my last two definitive moments, both in 2015. One was in July, when responsibility for teaching and student experience was added to my portfolio. I might have looked an odd choice for that role. I was known for research leadership, not teaching. That actually made me a rather cunning choice. Edinburgh's problem had been one of a strong research culture crowding out the priority given to teaching and to students. Perhaps it needed somebody with credibility in research to shift that culture and produce a better balance, both one of priority, but also one at a deeper level of engagement, of seeing students and their representatives as fundamental parts and authoritative voices in the university community. I have to say that the award I received from the Edinburgh University Students' Association at its annual Teaching Awards earlier this year for my impact in that role was one of the most special moments I've had as an academic. But going back to 2015, my last definitive moment was in January of that year, when I went to a meeting with 6 local authorities in and around Edinburgh to discuss a city deal to secure investment from government to grow the economy of the region. There followed more meetings than I care to remember over the next 3.5 years, but it was worth it. Over time, we crafted a vision for economic growth centred on the contribution of universities to the tech economy. But importantly, that vision married growth with inclusion, so that people from disadvantaged communities would have the opportunity to participate in the tech economy, so that people in jobs disrupted by technological change would have opportunities to develop new skills, and so that steps would be taken to tackle underrepresentation, in particular of women working in the tech sector. And we could do that plausibly because of the coalition we had put together: universities, local authorities, schools, colleges, business groups. That vision of growth with inclusion worked. It secured £300 million each from the UK and the Scottish governments, and with it one of those vanishingly rare moments when both the UK Prime Minister and the Scottish First Minister smiled at the same time. Although for the UK Prime Minister it was clearly harder to do so. And my hope is that we can build that kind of coalition here in York, with the university at the heart of a programme for inclusive growth. I'm confident we can, because of those things that mark York out as a special university, because of that shared sense of purpose I spoke about earlier and to which I now turn. Now, I spent some time in the archives of the wonderful Borthwick Institute learning about when the university was founded back in the early 1960s. In a whole host of ways, what the founder generation set out to do was not just distinctive and inspirational then, but remains relevant and just as inspirational in thinking about the purposes of the university today. The University of York was founded as part of a big expansion of the UK's higher education system in the 1960s. Much of that expansion was driven by the need to supply new skills for a modernising economy. But there was more to it than that. The new universities were also charged with the discovery of new knowledge, a search for truth. That too was to shape the education of their students so that when they left university, they were not just technically proficient in their fields, but able to stand back and apply their learning beyond those specific fields. The new universities were to promote the general powers of the mind. And with that, they were to have a wider impact than one measured simply in economic terms. We might describe this now as a commitment to public good, to adding value to our society as well as to our economy. So that was the wider context into which the University of York was born. But the founders didn't aim to produce an identikit university that mirrored the others founded in the 1960s. They had in mind, I quote, a rather imaginative scheme, one that was rather different from that of many universities established in this country. A good part of that difference had to do with the local members of the founding committee, especially those from the Rowntree trusts, the successors of the social reformers Joseph and Seabohm Rowntree. They were keen that the traditional interest of the Rowntrees in, I quote, social betterment should be honoured in the new university. To honour an interest in social betterment, that's a potent statement of purpose. And with that, they brought not just a distinctive concern about inequality into the university, but also the view that this university should do something about inequality through research, teaching, and the impact of its graduates. This gave a powerful impetus to the social sciences at York, and their work still bears that distinctive Rowntree stamp. But this wasn't just about social science. The York commitment to social betterment was to apply in the natural sciences too. The York Academic Trust, the civic body which campaigned to establish the university, for example, exhorted it to develop scientific studies which tend directly or indirectly to the amelioration of human life and conditions. So too the arts and humanities. They sought, in the words of the first head of English, a fitting relationship between the intrinsic satisfaction of an academic study and its relevance to things outside. Projecting that forward to today, I'm struck not just by the sheer quality of our work in the arts and humanities, but also a continuing commitment to working with partners in the arts, in the heritage sector, in the creative economy, with the wider public, all underlining that relevance to things outside. In all of this, there is a York sense of what it is to be a university for public good. I don't think that any other university founded in that era had that distinctive impetus. The same can be said of another theme rooted in university expansion in the 1960s, widening participation. All the 1960s universities were established to widen participation, to open up university study to those who hadn't before had that opportunity. But not all those universities brought to that purpose the commitment of the first Vice-Chancellor, Lord James. As he put it in 1963, above all, opportunity has increased enormously. Opportunity for people, whatever their social background, to lead genuinely fuller lives. It is that expansion of opportunity that I care about more than almost anything else. And James and his colleagues really put their backs into delivering that opportunity through a willingness to look beyond the norm in recruiting students. A few examples from the very first cohort to join the University of York in October 1963. On the left there, you'll see Brian Marslack and Geoffrey Roselar, the first ever students from one secondary modern school in London to go to university. And then there was Margaret Waugh, a young local woman disabled by a climbing accident, a wheelchair user, academically talented, rejected previously by 6 other universities but accepted here. Sadly, she didn't complete her degree, but at least York was the university to give her that chance. And then there was, in the middle on the right here, George Croft, 64 years old, who gave up his job as a pharmacist to do economics and politics, committed to learning something new about the society he lived in. And on the right, there was the redoubtable Mrs. Mary Cooper, mother of 4, BA Social Science, who didn't, I quote, "see why women of my age should be limited to making tea and knitting tea cozies. Great things are going on in the world, and I want to be among them." Quite right. These were all boundary breakers, and they could be because this was a boundary-breaking university, and it still is and needs to be that today. Widening access, opening up opportunity, including those who have been excluded, is a powerful part of our heritage. What we need to do is think hard what that means today, and where we don't enough resemble the society around us, we should do something about it. Like Lord James, I think we should care about that more than almost anything else. Let me touch on 3 other foundational features of the University of York which resonate strongly today: international ambition, civic roots, and strength of community. First, international ambition. This was a university that was international from the outset. The aim from the very first intake in 1963 was to recruit at least 10% of students from beyond the UK. And by 1972, we were well on the way, drawing in students from 34 different countries. All this was before international tuition fees. This was about nothing more than widening the experience of students, home and international, through interaction with each other. And as with students, so with staff. For example, in the academic year 64-65, academic staff visited universities or attended conferences in 16 countries across Europe, Africa, and North America. As Lord James put it, while such travel was challenging at that time, it said something about, I quote, "the cooperation, friendliness, and idealism that one can only hope will remain characteristic of this university." Well, it did. Last year, for example, we had research collaborations in 51 countries, many supported by our membership of the worldwide universities network of 23 leading universities. We now have students from 140 countries and close to 120 exchange agreements enabling our students to spend time elsewhere in the world and students from around the world to come to York. All this supports the flow of ideas between places, contributing to public good, to the amelioration of human life and conditions. The difference is we now have scope to do it on a genuinely global scale. So with that in mind, I return to October 1963. The then Archbishop of York, Donald Coggan, decided to hold a service in the Minster to mark the inauguration of the university. This was not entirely to the university's satisfaction, as it had a secular identity. But nonetheless, the service went ahead, and the Archbishop gave a rather stern sermon, which in part bemoaned that secularism. The sermon was also an extraordinary paean to internationalism, addressed at 2 notional undergraduates, Tom Smith and Betty Jones, and exhorting them to take the openness of outlook they would acquire at the University of York into the world. Here's what the Archbishop said. Tom Smith and Betty Jones, undergraduates, whether they like it or not, are world citizens. Just as isolationism in world politics has proved futile and impossible, so insularity of outlook will prove increasingly useless in the world of the 20th century. Tom and Betty are citizens not only of York, not only of England or Great Britain, not only of Europe, but the world. Now, we have heard views in the recent past that being a citizen of the world is not a good thing to be. But I'm with the Archbishop on this one, and I'm delighted and proud that the openness of outlook was from the outset, with Tom and Betty, and remains now such an important principle at this university. Recalling the contribution of Archbishop Coggan takes me to a further foundational feature of the University of York, its civic roots. The university exists because of the extraordinary commitment of leading figures in York, in the Minster, in the Rowntree Trusts, in the City Council, and beyond. Together they carried out a patient campaign to establish this university more or less from the end of the Second World War, which finally came to fruition in the early 1960s. And that civic commitment continued. The government funding the early university received paid for academic facilities and salaries, but not student accommodation. That had to be funded through a public appeal. In the 18 months through to October 1963, the appeal raised £1.6 million, which would be something like £33 million today. Quite extraordinary. And that money came from a wide range of supporters, companies, charities, individuals, the great majority from York and Yorkshire. I find this local drive to win a university for the city and then to find the money to launch it successfully an inspiration. I also see it as an obligation. We should work hard to ensure the city and the surrounding region reap benefit from the public good that we deliver. Universities which are successful internationally, as this one is, can sometimes lose from view the place out of which they grew. This university should not be one of those. I'll return later to what I think we can contribute. But let me touch on one final foundational feature of this university, its strength of community. I've been struck by its commitment to including and supporting all of its members, academic staff and professional staff, students, whatever their background, in shared pursuit of its goals. I think that sense of shared purpose is stronger than in many other universities. And for me, that strength of purpose is rooted in the kind of university the pioneer generation created in the 1960s. Those pioneers consciously avoided drawing dividing lines. They consciously included all those who had a part in the university. You can see that in an architectural vision designed to bring together academic staff and students in the colleges and to bridge the boundaries of academic disciplines so that each, meeting at the nodes in this wonderful contemporary, almost pop art campus plan, would be enriched by the greatest possible contact with the others. And you can see it in an anticipation of later debates about equality of opportunity. For example, in 1966, the annual report expressed the university's obligation to students, regardless of class, creed, or race. Now, that was hardly normal language of its time. And earlier in May 1963, the founding committee expressed its disappointment at the small number of women applicants for the initial batch of academic posts at the university. And that's a metric we rightly have an eagle eye on today. But again, this was not normal language or priority of that time. And you can see the commitment to inclusion at a more general level in an all-for-one and one-for-all mentality, no doubt nurtured by the sheer challenge of building a university from scratch. This was expressed wonderfully by Lord James in his valedictory report in 1972 in words which remain as relevant today. He wrote, "It's important that the word 'we' be emphasised. I cannot believe that any institution has ever rested more on collaboration between men and women with very different tasks, but all essential. Whether it be porters or domestic staff, academics or administrators, students or clerks, I've always been conscious of a collaborative enterprise that at its best has always put consideration and respect as among the prerequisites for success." Today, as then, success, all the tremendous achievements of our academic staff, our professional services staff, our students, our alumni, rest on ensuring that the abilities of all members of the university community are nurtured without hindrance, so they reach their potential individually, and we strengthen through that our collective capability. I hope with these thoughts to have distilled something of the essence of this university, its commitment to public good, sharpened by that concern about inequality, its tradition of widening participation, a purposeful internationalism which pushes the pursuit of public good beyond national boundaries, that mix of support from and commitment to city and region, and the strength of shared purpose that comes from caring about inclusiveness. After this lecture, you can pick up a booklet which, under these headings, sets out some examples of how we're living up to those strong principles today. And it's those same strong principles I want us to have in mind as we look ahead at the challenges and opportunities we will face in future. I'd like us to have an intense conversation around the university over the next few months to produce a shared strategic vision that can guide us over the next decade. We, of course, face pressing, immediate challenges: Brexit, issues around pensions, and whichever government we end up with in the next few months decides to do on fees and regulation. But I don't want us to focus on these things in our strategy conversation. We'll deal with them, however difficult they may be, through our normal decision-making processes. Instead, I want us to stand back and think about the longer term. What kind of university should we be by, say, 2030? What are the changing conditions we will face, and how can we position ourselves to flourish amid change? Let me give some examples of the things we may need to think about. The first concerns reputation. By most comparative measures, the UK university sector is excellent and recognised as such around the world. Despite that, UK universities have seen themselves criticised routinely in policy debate and in the media over the last few years. They, the story goes, don't care enough about their students, don't do enough for the communities around them, they only care about money, their expertise is self-serving. Indeed, as some have said, people have had enough of experts like us. I'm clear that none of that is correct. But it's equally clear that these are widely held views. They stem from a perception that we are part of an establishment that has prospered while other parts of our society struggle. We need to change that perception across the sector, and I'd like us to be in the vanguard here in York. So what do we want our reputation to be? If we believe we're here for public good, let's work out how to make that real to the parts of society that don't currently believe we are relevant to them. My second longer-term challenge has to do with the climate crisis. All the expert judgment, and we have brilliant experts on this in this university, is that we face a global emergency. And because we have that brilliant expertise, including among our students who are often passionate about tackling that emergency, we have an obligation to act. I want that expertise and passion to produce, by the new year, an evidence plan of our response to the climate crisis. Some steps have been taken. I've set up a staff and student working group to build that plan, to think about reducing emissions, to think about how we can best deploy our research into industry and policy, to think about how we can best equip our students through what they study here to embed sustainability in their careers. And I'm pleased today to announce that the University of York no longer holds investments in fossil fuel companies. But there is so much more to do. What we can be sure of is that we will see massive change here in this university and elsewhere over the next decade. So I want us to think about what being in a low-carbon economy and society will mean for us in 10 years' time. How will this change what our students want to study? What skills they will want to leave university with? Where our research should be headed? How will a university with global reach and ambition maintain that reach as we move towards net zero carbon emissions? One thing I'm certain of is that we'll not be doing all the things we're doing now. The same can be said, thirdly, about technological change. New technologies have already transformed how universities operate, how we organise our teaching, how we carry out our research. Where is that trajectory taking us in the next decade? Will more of our students study online than on campus? How do we ensure online students have as good and as personal an experience as students on campus? How will we ensure public good comes from the even more unimaginably vast flows of data that we will see? How will we share our data and publish our research? How much of the university will be operated through sensors and robots? How do we manage the ethical challenges of new data technologies and keep our community and others safe? Again, one thing I'm certain of is that we'll not be doing all the things we're doing now. Fourth, the global context will change over the next decade. The origin of our students and of our university partners will change. We know where the biggest growth in university-age young people will be, with India and Africa at the forefront. Demand for and investment in higher education will follow. So how do we position ourselves to work with brilliant students from those places? What university partnerships will we want to have, and when do we need to start putting them in place? Where and to whom will the work that we do bring public good? I suspect, for example, that much of our response to the climate crisis will be through international collaborations by 2030. And what will all this mean for our community, for our students and our staff? What will students expect from higher education? What will they expect to be part of the curriculum? Will they still want to take degrees, those big integrated chunks of learning that have been our model for hundreds of years? Or smaller chunks taken by students already in work or on short study breaks looking to reskill or top up as lifelong learners? And what will employers want from those who study with us? Technical skills or something more? I recall a future-gazing conversation with a group of graduate employers a while ago which singled out wisdom as the most important graduate attribute. Wisdom, the ability to flex and adapt across sectors and countries in different phases of their career. How will we nurture such wisdom? Finally, what will this mean for our staff? These big challenges around public trust, low-carbon transition, new technologies, a shifting international environment and changing student expectations will all impact on our staff, on how and even where we work. So how do we ensure our employment remains both rewarding and fair? How do we maintain that York shared purpose? How do we remain inclusive amid what will be far-reaching change? These are all questions we need to consider collectively to help produce this university's responses to them. They'll be set out in a strategy consultation paper that will be published in the next few days. With that as background, I will be visiting all academic and professional service departments over the autumn to hear views about the future from staff across the university. And I'll be working with our two students' unions to engage with as many of our students as possible. And I will look to our alumni, our industry partners, our partners in city and region to give us their insights. Please do join in. And through all of that, we should be in a position by January to publish a strategic vision which is both forward-looking and unambiguously shaped by the distinctive features and heritage of this university. As we embark on that conversation, it's worth a glance at other universities' strategies. It's no exaggeration to say that for many of them, if you struck out the name University X and substituted it with University Y, you'd be none the wiser. They can be very generic. I don't think that's good enough for us. Just as York wasn't an identikit university in the 1960s, so it shouldn't be now. So let me offer, in the final few minutes of this lecture, my early thoughts on what a York strategy could include. One thing is to recognise our constraints. York is, for example, smaller and less financially powerful than some of its comparators. But while we may have less heft, we should have more agility. We will need to use that agility well if we're to keep pace with our comparators and secure the funding to match our ambitions. And while the original campus was not just an architectural, but also an intellectual triumph for its vision of interaction across disciplines, much of it is now not fit for purpose, for teaching and research, for the experience of students inside and outside the classroom, for reducing carbon emissions. And for all of those reasons, it threatens to be a drag on our development. And the university has a certain institutional modesty. I don't think it projects its strengths enough outwardly in ways which can help it continue to punch its weight. So for me, our strategy will need to respond to constraints of size, estate, and institutional modesty to ensure the university can continue to flourish. Those responses will be interlinked. The estate challenge cannot just be about the renovation and replacement of what we have now. It needs to be about transformation, providing the platform on which we meet long-term challenges and work in different ways with different funding to do so. And size may be, but is certainly not just about growth on campus. It's also about growing capability and reach in other ways, in particular in projecting strength outward into collaboration. Let me point to 3 ways in which this university's strengths can be scaled up through collaborative activity with these and other partners in city and region, nationally and internationally. A first is through leadership of large-scale academic partnerships. Our work on the bioeconomy is a great example, where our collaboration with other universities and with industry has put us in a position of national leadership of a programme of extraordinary ambition to heal, feed and fuel the world through biotechnology. Brilliant. Not least because it mobilises strengths from across the university. And we have both achievement and potential to play that kind of role in other fields, in that powerful interface we have between creative arts and computer science, in quantum technologies, in robotics and autonomous systems. But what else? What could we achieve if all of our expertise on climate change and its mitigation combined into a single York programme? Could we connect that with our growing portfolio of work in global development and use that to build new, powerful collaborations? What about our work in health, which is different to our comparator universities? It rests more on work across disciplines, connecting from medicine, health sciences, psychology and biology across into the arts, humanities and social sciences. And it's more grounded in our communities, with its emphasis on primary care and mental health. I think we have perhaps the best cross-disciplinary expertise in mental health in the UK. What can we do with that expertise, working with other universities, the NHS, and funders like the Wellcome Trust? Second, we can collaborate much more in city and region, sharing in civic leadership. We do much already, for example, in collaborations around the unique heritage of this city and in a brilliant festival of ideas with over 100 local partners. But there can be much more. I'd like to see the university working closely with colleges, local authorities, economic development bodies, and businesses large and small in connecting research and graduate talent to economic growth. There's a great opportunity at the York Central Development site next to the railway station. Can that be a hub for building jobs and drawing in investment in the bioeconomy, in the creative industries, in robotics? And alongside that, we should collaborate to ensure that the opportunities a dynamic economy can offer are opened up to disadvantaged communities and groups. So let's build on our work with local schools, York College, Askham Bryan College, York St John University, Hull University and others to establish an educational ecosystem that reaches and serves those who currently don't see benefit from universities. Let's begin to shift that problem of public trust. The third way of projecting strengths is through international collaboration. York's strengths are not well enough known around the world. We need a concerted effort to change that. There are opportunities to engage with international students both here on campus and online, which we're not taking. And there are opportunities for partnership in research, teaching and student exchange for which our strengths are an entry ticket and which can multiply our impact. Our partnership with the University of Maastricht in the Netherlands is a great example and an important one in the context of Brexit. But where else? How can we anticipate those changes we will see in patterns of demand for and investment in higher education around the world? Let's get ahead of the curve, thinking about how we will best collaborate for public good in future. I have to say that meaningful collaboration in Africa would be near the top of my list. What does all this mean for our students? We rightly have a tight focus on ensuring both great teaching and a brilliant wider experience for our students. I think our students too will benefit from a more concerted projection of our strengths through collaboration. Academic partnership, civic leadership and international engagement all create opportunities for different ways of learning through experience which can add value to our formal curriculum. Active learning by doing research in cutting-edge research collaborations, the community and work-based learning opportunities opened up by civic leadership, and the opportunities for experience of different contexts and cultures which flow from greater international engagement. In all of this, the estate is pivotal. In the next years, we will be carrying through existing building plans for new residential colleges and new academic programs. But we may also want to think about reconfiguring by locating departments closer together for the interdisciplinary collaborations of the future. And we may want new collaborative spaces where researchers, students and industry sit side by side in cross-fertilisation, or where new access pathways are delivered together with colleges and businesses. For me, that requires a transformational plan driven by a vision of how we will work in new ways in future. And that will need income additional to that we have now. Some will come from our normal operations, but we will also have to make the case for infrastructure funding from government. Now, the current government has promised investment and opportunity in the north. The current opposition has spoken of university research and innovation as part of the national infrastructure into which it would ratchet up investment. Whichever way, and from whomever it is on offer, we have to make sure we win a decent chunk of public funding in and for York. Industry collaborations will need to be crafted so they add to the pot, and so will philanthropy. Our new fundraising campaign, York Unlimited, rightly has as one of its themes the campus of the future. I hope our alumni who experienced what certainly was a campus of the future in the 1960s will help us to create and fund the next iteration, a campus that provides the platform for our brilliant staff and students to unfold their talents to the maximum. Let me close as we consider the far-reaching changes we may need to make over the next decade with a reflection on how we should approach change. We may well need to make difficult choices. My sense is that some universities have failed to articulate how their choices and changes fit with their principles, in consequence, dispiriting their communities. That's not a mistake I intend to make. And here I take inspiration for one last time from Lord James, at a moment when he and his colleagues were grappling with changes in regulation and cuts in funding. Some things really do not change. Let me quote him against that background from his annual report in 1969. "My greatest fear is that our preoccupation with administrative and financial matters may lead us to regard them as ends in themselves, so that we devote too little thought to what it's all for. The education of young men and women so that they may be aware of a heritage of civilization, and the provision of opportunities for scholars to enlarge and reinterpret it." What it's all for. Let's make sure we devote enough thought to that. The choices we make need to have an anchorage in the strong principles that animate this university. At York, what it's all for is to open up new knowledge, to ensure students have the rounded experience that enables both economic and wider contributions to society. It's to widen access, to promote the exchange of ideas across borders, to connect to the communities around us, to nurture inclusiveness, and in all these ways it is to contribute to public good and social justice. I look forward immensely to working with you all to shape a shared strategic vision that builds on this distinctive heritage at this extraordinary university. Thank you. Coffee and cake.